11 months. That is how long they had been watching a number that should not exist. Not a person, not a place, not a vehicle crossing a checkpoint at 2 in the morning. A number. 3 industrial CNC machines drawing full-load power inside a building that had been legally closed for 8 months. A building with no employees on file, no active business license, no lease renewal, no forwarding address. A building that, on paper, was dark. The number said otherwise. And somewhere in a Southwest County administrative office, a clerk reviewing utility billing discrepancies wrote 3 lines in a memo that almost no one would read. She noted the address. She noted the power draw. She noted that the business listed as the account holder had dissolved 8 months prior. 3 lines. What those 3 lines eventually led to: 4 simultaneous raid sites, 19 federal indictments, 7,400 suppressor cores, and a cartel pipeline valued at $61 million, is the story of how a machine that never should have been running almost ran for a full year without anyone stopping it. This is not a story about a tip. There was no informant who walked into a field office. There was no intercepted phone call that broke the case open on day 1. This started the way the most dangerous operations almost always start, with something so small, so mundane, that it nearly disappeared into a filing cabinet and stayed there forever. A closed school, a power bill, and one analyst who asked the right question. This is the story of Operation Iron Kiln. It did not begin with ATF. It began with a county clerk's office in a mid-sized southwestern city during a routine audit of commercial utility accounts flagged for billing irregularities. The kind of audit that generates reports no one requests and documents that live in shared drives no one monitors. The kind of work that is, by design, invisible. The clerk, a mid-level administrative employee with no law enforcement background, no security clearance, no particular reason to escalate, noticed that a commercial property listed as a vocational welding school had been drawing consistent industrial-grade power for months after its business dissolution date. Not residential draw, not the trickle you'd expect from a security system or a single HVAC unit maintaining temperature. Industrial draw, the kind associated with active CNC machining equipment, cooling systems, and high-voltage fabrication tools. She wrote the memo. She routed it to the county's business compliance desk. The compliance desk had a working relationship with a regional ATF field office, a liaison arrangement established years earlier for exactly these kinds of commercial anomalies. Code violations, unlicensed business activity, zoning discrepancies. The memo arrived at the field office in a batch of 17 similar referrals from that quarter. 16 of them were routine, 1 was not. The ATF analyst who reviewed the batch almost set it aside. The address matched a known defunct vocational school, closed the previous year after the operator cited financial hardship and surrendered the business license. No prior law enforcement contact. No flags in the commercial database, nothing, on the surface, that would elevate it above the 16 routine referrals sitting in the same folder. What made him look twice was a secondary database cross-reference he ran out of habit. Supply chain filings for commercial equipment at that address. The welding school had, in its final operating months, filed documentation for the acquisition of 3 industrial CNC machines, Swiss-type lathes, precision instruments capable of cutting metal components to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The kind of equipment a welding school might legitimately own for training purposes. The kind of equipment that, running unsupervised in a closed building at night, could produce something else entirely. The analyst flagged the file and requested a quiet drive-by from a field agent. What the agent saw from the street confirmed nothing and suggested everything. The building appeared dormant, windows covered, loading dock sealed, no visible activity. But the utility meter on the exterior wall was spinning. At that point, the file moved up. What no one expected was what a parallel record search would surface within the first 72 hours of elevated review. The building's former operator had not simply closed the school and walked away. In the months before the dissolution filing, the operator had quietly restructured a supply relationship with a defunct HVAC parts distributor, a company that had itself gone out of business 2 years earlier, but whose federal tax identification number was still active in the commercial database. Through that dormant ID, bulk purchases of titanium tubing had been routed and invoiced. Titanium tubing, in the specific diameter and wall thickness specification used to manufacture suppressor cores. Not suppressor housings, not finished units. Cores, the internal baffling components. The part that does the work. The part that transforms a legal firearm into a federally regulated device the moment it is manufactured without a license. The quantity on the invoices did not suggest a hobbyist. It did not suggest a licensed manufacturer filling a legitimate order. Cross-referenced against the power consumption data and the CNC machine specifications, the quantity pointed to a production operation. A sustained, systematic, high-volume production operation running in a building that officially did not exist anymore. The analyst brought the package to his supervisor. The supervisor brought it to the special agent in charge. The SAC made one call. 11 months later, that call would end with 19 people in handcuffs. The investigation was designated Operation Iron Kiln. The name was internal, compartmentalized, shared only within the Joint Task Force that would spend the next 11 months building the case from the outside in. The task force brought together ATF special agents from 2 field divisions, FBI forensic accountants, and HSI analysts whose particular expertise was cross-border commodity smuggling. The structure was deliberate. Each agency brought a piece of the picture that the others could not see alone. ATF owned the weapons manufacturing question. Was a federal crime being committed in that building? What was being made, in what quantity, and by whose authorization? FBI owned the financial architecture. How was this being funded, and where was the money going? HSI owned the border question. If finished components were moving south, they were crossing somewhere. And if they were crossing somewhere, there was a pipeline. The first several weeks of the investigation were almost entirely passive. No warrants, no surveillance teams, no contact with the subject, just records. Supply chain documentation, utility filings, corporate registration databases, financial institution reports. The kind of work that looks like nothing from the outside and builds everything from the inside. What the records showed was a layering operation of genuine sophistication. The titanium purchases moved through 4 separate legal entities, all defunct, all with active federal tax IDs, all connected through a chain of nominee signatories that required weeks of forensic accounting to untangle. The payments cleared through 3 different regional banks. The invoices described the materials as hayback component stock. The operation had been designed, from its first transaction, to be invisible. I spent time going through the reconstructed financial trail from this case, and one detail kept nagging at me: the level of patience. Whoever built this did not rush. They put the cover story in place before they built the first component. The HVAC invoicing structure was active months before the first CNC machine ran a single cut. That kind of discipline is not improvised. By week 6, the task force had enough to justify a Title III intercept application. Court-authorized surveillance of electronic communications associated with the primary subject and 2 identified associates. The application ran to over 200 pages. A federal judge reviewed it over a weekend and signed the order on a Monday morning. The intercepts went live. For the first 3 weeks, they produced almost nothing useful. The primary subject communicated in fragments, short calls, heavy use of encrypted messaging applications, frequent device changes. The task force had anticipated this. They were patient. They kept the intercepts running and kept pulling the thread on the financial side. Then, in week 9 of the investigation, something shifted. A new voice appeared in the intercepts. Not someone from the known associate network. Someone new. Someone who spoke in a different register, more careful, more structured, using what the analysts described in their notes as logistics language, quantities, timelines, delivery windows, confirmation codes. The task force ran the new voice against every database they had access to. No match. The individual was either unknown to federal law enforcement or was operating under an identity that had never surfaced before. They called him the coordinator. What the coordinator's calls revealed, over the following 6 weeks, was the downstream architecture of the operation. The finished suppressor cores were not being sold domestically. They were moving through a specific channel, welding gas cylinders, the large industrial tanks used to transport argon, acetylene, and CO2 to fabrication shops and construction sites. Legitimate commercial shipments, unremarkable in transit, moving along established logistics routes toward the southwest border. Inside the cylinders, nested in custom-fabricated internal frames, were the cores. The method was not new. Concealment inside industrial gas containers has appeared in federal smuggling cases before, but the scale and consistency of this operation was, according to task force notes, unusual. They were not moving a cylinder here and a cylinder there. They were moving coordinated shipments, timed to blend with legitimate commercial deliveries, hitting the same distribution nodes on rotating schedules. The task force identified 9 distinct shipment events over a 6-week window. They let all 9 move. They were building a map, and disrupting early shipments would collapse the surveillance before the map was complete. Think about what that actually means. Watching 9 separate shipments move toward the border, knowing what's inside them, with explicit orders not to intercept. Every instinct says act. The case discipline says wait. That tension is the actual job. Here is where Operation Iron Kiln hit its first serious obstacle. At the 11-week mark, the primary intercept device went dark. Not because the subject discovered the surveillance, because the subject changed devices again, faster than the task force had anticipated, and the new device identifier had not yet been associated with a known account. The gap lasted 4 days. 4 days in which the coordinator made at least 3 calls that the task force could not hear. When the intercepts came back online, the tone had changed. The coordinator was moving the next shipment window up by 10 days. Something had shifted on his end. Whether it was operational pressure from the downstream buyer, a logistical opportunity, or a security concern, the task force could not determine. What they knew was that their timeline had just compressed. The SAC convened an emergency review. The forensic accountants had not yet finished mapping the full financial network. 2 identified associates had not yet been placed at the building by physical surveillance. The case was not complete, but the alternative, letting the operation run another 10 days while suppressor cores continued moving south, was not an option. The SAC made the call. They would accelerate. The task force shifted from documentation mode to strike planning mode in under 48 hours. Most people assume federal raid planning is primarily a tactical exercise. You pick a date, you brief the entry teams, you execute. The evidence tells a different story. The planning phase for a multi-site simultaneous takedown of this complexity involved more legal work than tactical work. 4 separate search warrant applications, each requiring its own probable cause affidavit, each requiring judicial review, each requiring coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure that what agents found at each site could survive suppression challenges. The 4 sites were the primary building, the former welding school, where the manufacturing operation was located, a secondary warehouse 11 miles away that Intercepts had identified as a staging area, a residential property associated with the primary subject, and a commercial storage facility linked to one of the financial intermediaries. Each site required a separate entry team. Each entry team required a separate briefing package. Coordinating 4 simultaneous warrants, executed at dawn, across a geographic spread of roughly 30 miles, is a logistics problem as much as a tactical one. The BearCats, 2 armored vehicles from the regional ATF Special Response Team, were assigned to the primary building and the secondary warehouse. Those were the sites most likely to present resistance. The residential and storage facility entries were assigned to standard agent teams with local law enforcement support. Hour was set for 5:14 a.m. The night before the raid, a problem surfaced that nearly changed the plan. The task force's most recent surveillance pass on the secondary warehouse had been 6 days earlier. 6 days in which the operational tempo had accelerated. The lead agent on the warehouse entry team raised the concern directly. They did not have current intelligence on how many individuals might be inside. The SRT commander reviewed the available intercept data and made a judgment call. The most recent communication referencing the warehouse had indicated only 2 individuals associated with that location. He briefed his team on the uncertainty, and they adjusted their entry protocol, additional cover positions, modified breach sequence, extended perimeter. The plan held, 5:14 a.m., 4 sites, 4 entry teams, 1 radio channel. The command post was a nondescript panel van parked 3 blocks from the primary building. The SAC sat in the back with a tactical radio and a legal pad. The lead case agent sat next to him. At 5:14 a.m. and 0 seconds, the SAC said one word: execute. At the primary building, the former welding school, the BearCat rolled to the loading dock. The entry team had a mechanical breach kit and a hydraulic ram. The loading dock door was reinforced, heavier than a standard commercial door. The ram took 2 applications. The door came open at 5:15 a.m. and 40 seconds. The interior was exactly what the utility data had implied. 3 industrial CNC machines, still warm. Titanium stock racked along one wall. Finished components in labeled bins. A quality control station with precision measuring instruments. A packaging area with modified welding gas cylinders in various stages of preparation. 2 individuals were present. Both were detained without incident. Neither resisted. At the secondary warehouse, the second BearCat held perimeter, while the entry team made a standard breach through the personnel door. 3 individuals inside. One attempted to move toward a back exit and was intercepted by the perimeter team. All 3 were detained. At the residential property, the subject, the primary operator, the individual whose name appeared on the original business license, the person who had pocketed the $240,000, answered the door in a bathrobe when agents knocked. He did not run. He did not resist. He asked if he could put on shoes. They let him put on shoes. At the storage facility, agents found the financial records the forensic accountants had been reconstructing for months. Physical documents, ledgers, modified invoices for the HVAC cover company, and $140,000 in cash in a fireproof safe. Across all 4 sites, the operation took 11 minutes from first breach to last subject in custody. 19 individuals were taken into custody before the sun was fully up. Here is the part that doesn't make sense on the surface, and yet it does when you look at it carefully. The primary operator of this network, the individual who built the manufacturing side, the person who sourced the equipment and the materials and ran the concealment scheme through the defunct HVAC supplier, pocketed approximately $240,000 across the full run of the operation. That is what the financial reconstruction showed. His total take for 11 months of production, for building and running a facility that generated 7,400 suppressor cores, for supplying a cartel pipeline valued at $61 million in illicit firearms market value. $240,000 against $61 million. That ratio, the small personal payment against the enormous downstream value, is not unusual in these cases. It is, in fact, the logic of the supply chain. The operator takes the legal risk and accepts a small fraction of the value. The buyer, the pipeline, the cartel, whoever holds the distribution network on the other side of the border, captures almost all of the margin. The coordinator, the voice who appeared in Week 9, was never physically present at any of the 4 sites. Intercept data placed him in communication with individuals across the border throughout the operation. He was not among the 19 taken into custody. His actual identity, at the time of the raids, remained unconfirmed. He remains unidentified. Here's the take that'll probably draw some disagreement. The operator's $240,000 cut will be treated as evidence of his culpability, and it should be. But the person who built the system, who found the operator, who designed the gas cylinder concealment method, who connected this supply chain to a cartel distribution network worth $61 million, walked away untouched. The sentencing math here falls almost entirely on the people who did the labor, not the person who built the architecture. That is a structural problem that 19 indictments do not solve. What strikes me about this case is that the entire 11-month investigation was made necessary by the absence of a system that should have caught this automatically. A closed commercial building drawing industrial power for 8 months should trigger an automated flag somewhere in a federal database. It did not. A defunct company's federal tax ID being used for bulk purchases of precision-spec titanium tubing should trigger a cross-reference alert. It did not. Those systems either do not exist or do not talk to each other. A county clerk's 3-line memo is not a detection system. It is luck. The indictments covered 19 individuals across multiple states. The charges included unlicensed manufacture of firearm suppressors under federal statute, conspiracy to violate the National Firearms Act, and federal smuggling charges related to the export of controlled firearm components without authorization. Several defendants faced additional charges related to money laundering and use of fictitious business entities to facilitate federal crimes. The sentencing range on the primary charges runs from 5 years to 25 years depending on the specific counts and criminal history of each defendant. The primary operator faced the most exposure. Several defendants with peripheral roles negotiated cooperation agreements with the U.S. Attorney's Office in exchange for providing information about the downstream pipeline. The 7,400 suppressor cores recovered across the 4 sites represented what investigators estimated as 9 months of production. The machines had run for approximately 11 months before the raid. By the task force's own estimate, a portion of the output, potentially representing 2 months of production, had already cleared the pipeline before the operation began. The precise quantity of finished components that crossed the border before the investigation concluded was not publicly confirmed. The pipeline was dismantled on the U.S. side. What entered the distribution network on the other side was not recovered. That number, the unrecovered portion, the cores that are already out there, doesn't sit right, even now. Will operations like this surface again before the cross-agency database gaps are closed? Comment yes or no, because this case suggests the answer is almost certainly yes, and we want to know if you see it the same way. If you would have missed the signal too, subscribe to Federal Casebook, and tell us in the comments which thread you'd have pulled first, the power draw, the titanium invoices, or the defunct tax ID. The network was dismantled. The building is dark again, this time for real. 19 people face federal prosecution. The machines are in an ATF evidence facility. The coordinator is somewhere else, probably building the next one. That is the part that does not resolve, the part that a dawn raid cannot reach. The architecture of a supply network like this is not in the building. It is in the relationship between the coordinator and whoever pays him. Those relationships do not get seized. They do not sit in evidence bags with barcode labels. They survive the operation and wait. 7,400. The number of suppressor cores recovered across 4 sites. 31. The number of shipment events reconstructed by the task force across 9 months of surveillance. 61 million. The estimated illicit firearms market value of the pipeline. 240,000. What the operator pocketed. 11. The number of months they watched a number that should not have existed. 19. The number of individuals indicted before sunrise. 4. The number of sites breached in 11 minutes. 3. The number of lines in a county clerk's memo. 1. One memo. One analyst who ran a secondary cross-reference out of habit. One question that did not go back in the filing cabinet. The machines ran for most of a year. A closed school billed full industrial power for 8 months, and one clerk wrote it down. How many shuttered buildings are drawing more than they should right now? And who is reading the meters?